Hello guys, today we will be talking about what if adult Naruto went back in time to his kid body part 5 finale. If you enjoy this video please like and subscribe. Now let's begin. It's an S-class village secret. No one is supposed to talk about it. Only me and my dad can tell someone. We were young when I found out. I was going to tell you soon, I had planned to when we became ninjas. Naruto explained as well as he could without having to say he was afraid. Sasuke seemed to accept the explanation, and picked up the forbidden scroll. Your dad's here, Sasuke said, motioning with his head as he saw the Yondaime pushing through clones to get to Mizuki. Naruto turned around and dispelled all his clones now that he knew his father could take care of the traitor. That, Naruto called getting the older blonde's attention since the traitor was out cold. Minato sighed, almost forgetting why he'd been there in the first place after all the drama, and the Chunin, who he still didn't know what happened with, though the forbidden scroll Sasuke was carrying might have something to do with it. You two have a lot of explaining to do, Minato said, giving the boys an incredulous look. Sasuke kept his Uchiha stare while Naruto rubbed the back of his hair with his hand, smiling sheepishly. Sasuke was nowhere near satisfied in his curiosity about Naruto being the host of the Kyuubi, but for now he knew Naruto was still his friend as much as ever, and for now that was enough. Naruto was so relieved Sasuke wasn't afraid of him and didn't hate him. He forgot that he had just pranked every major compound in the village and escaped Anbu custody and probably more of a challenge, his father. So he had let his guard down. Big mistake if he out in the field, but Sasuke had accepted him, so he could scold himself on self-preservation tactics later. While Minato tied up Mizuki, he missed when Naruto handed the pictures back to Sasuke. Naruto knew, Hokage's son or not, he was most likely to be searched after what he pulled today. After the traitor was secured, Minato transported them all back to his office in the Hokage Tower. It was then Naruto knew his father hadn't forgotten what happened earlier, even with the unconscious Mizuki next to them. Take him away, Minato ordered the Anbu that were hidden nearby, believing his son had a good reason for beating the crap out of him. The secretary peeked in, noticing he was there, before anything else could be said. Hokage-sama, clan heads Hayashi Hyuga-sama, Shikaku Nara-sama, Zuna News Yuki-sama, Shibuya-sama, Inoichi Yamanaka-sama, Choza Akuichi-sama, and Shioko Uchiha-sama are here to see you. And some parents called complaining about something happening down at the academy today, the secretary stated. Minato sighed. He knew exactly what they wanted, and didn't blame them, but he really hoped they weren't making formal complaints. That would only add to his never-ending paperwork. Alright, tell them it will be just a few minutes, Minato said, dismissing her so that he could know what happened after his son caused chaos throughout the village. As much as he loved Naruto, he was glad there weren't two of them. Once she shut the door, Minato stared at Naruto and Sasuke for answers, though mostly at Naruto, since he was sure it was his son behind the plan. Start from the beginning, Naruto. What did you do to the clans? Why did you beat up at Chunin, and why do you, Sasuke, have the forbidden scroll? Minato asked firmly, eyeing them both as they looked at each other. Though from when Naruto had told him about what Mizuki had done before he could guess the last part, Naruto sighed. Mizuki stole the scroll and was trying to leave the village when he saw us. He told Sasuke I was the Kyuubi, but I talked with him and we're good. The clans aren't hurt. Naruto smiled sheepishly at the last part. Minato looked over to Sasuke when the boy snorted at the part about the clans. Is this true, Sasuke? You're okay with Naruto being a Jinchuriki? He asked, though he mostly knew from listening in on them. Yes, Namikaze-san, Sasuke answered, ready to back his longtime friend. Minato gave a small smile and nodded at him in approval. Naruto felt confident and happy, like a weight had been lifted off him. He wasn't alone, now he could talk to Sasuke more freely. And you know you are forbidden to speak of this, without mine or Naruto's permission, Minato asked, making sure the Nujinin knew how important it was to not tell anyone. I understand, Sasuke replied, keeping eye contact with the village leader. Minato nodded to him again. Good. Sasuke, you may go home, I'm sure your mother is looking for you. Minato said as the sun was already down and the moon could be seen in the twilight. Naruto, have a seat. Minato ordered his son. If he had to listen to all the complaints that went with his son's sense of humor, then he wasn't going to do it alone. Sasuke left out the door with a small smirk as he saw Naruto sit down with a pout. As he left the office he noticed all the people waiting to get in, including his aunt Shiyoko, who was a jounin on his mother's side of the family and the current leader of his clan after his mother refused the position. She was one of the few Uchiha ninja who hadn't been in on the coup and was cleared of all charges. The young raven tried hard to keep his face blank as she raised an eyebrow at him. He just nodded his acknowledgement to her as he was leaving. Luckily she and everyone else waiting were called in as he was going, so he wasn't questioned. Sasuke let out a breath when he finally got outside and started jogging home so that he wouldn't be walking with his aunt if she got out soon, though he doubted she would. Minato held his head and in his hand as he watched the clan heads bicker in front of his desk, occasionally throwing a dirty look at his son who sat on the couch trying to look anywhere but at them. It wasn't an "I hate you, you're a demon" glare either, or he would be very angry. It was an "you are a damn pain in the ass brat" glare, which Minato normal would try and defend his son from, but this time, he knew all the clan leaders had a good reason. Mizuki was quickly overwhelmed by Naruto's never-ending clones and Naruto turned back to Sasuke hesitantly. What if Sasuke didn't accept him? Or worse, what if Sasuke was afraid of him? The 12-year-old let his blonde spiky locks cover his eyes as he walked slowly to where he knew Sasuke was standing. He wouldn't look, but he couldn't help but listen carefully for any sign of fear or attack from Sasuke. Luckily or not, Sasuke made no move or any sound as he watched Naruto approach him cautiously as if he were a scared animal. It annoyed Sasuke as he thought that he wasn't an animal and he wasn't scared. Was he? He couldn't actually be scared of Naruto, could he? They were best friends. But Naruto still hadn't denied being a Kyuubi and he couldn't be friends with a demon. Right? And Naruto hadn't ever. Well, if you didn't count his pranks, he never did anything evil. Hell, even if you did count his pranks, Sasuke couldn't think of one of Naruto's pranks that had permanently harmed anyone. A few had odd effects that kept their targets from normal activities for a few days but never really hurt them. Sasuke? Naruto questioned cautiously, just slightly looking up and through the blonde spikes of his hair. Sasuke looked at him and couldn't see it. He couldn't see how his best friend that he'd had since before he could remember could possibly be a demon who killed so many people. Though he still couldn't keep himself from asking, he just had to hear it from Naruto himself. "Are you really Kyuubi?" Sasuke asked, though it seemed to shatter the silence of the forest. Naruto felt his heart clench but smiled sadly. "No." Naruto shook his head slowly. "I'm not." The blonde hesitated but mentally pushed himself. It was time. "But there is something that you should know." Minato stepped out of the shower. His clone had dispelled about 30 minutes ago with the location of his son, but he just couldn't bring himself to leave the shower while he still felt peanut butter on him. He shivered, thinking about the gooey stuff all over him. He was still pretty sure there was some left in his hair despite washing it 4 times. After drying off, Minato quickly dressed. He was sure some of his ninja were wonder where he was. Once he was dressed and had all his equipment, Minato was gone in a yellow flash. He reappeared where his clone had dropped one of his kunai before it dispelled. Walking the rest of the way, Minato soon spotted his son and Sasuke, but he also spotted a lot of his son's clones beating some unfortunate shonen up. As powerful as Kyuubi couldn't be sealed in a pot like the Kyuubi. It has to be sealed into a human child. Preferably a young one if the Kyuubi isn't able to truly die, so my father needed to seal the demon. But a demon wanted to not just destroy the vessel. Minato heard Naruto say to Sasuke. Minato pulled back knowing his son need to say this. He had prolonging telling Sasuke for a while. So Minato hid but stayed close enough to listen. "So you are its vessel?" Sasuke asked hesitantly. Naruto was afraid of Sasuke's reaction, but it was far too late to back out now. He nodded. "I am the Kyuubi Jinchuriki." Naruto stated, his face blank. Minato felt his stomach clench slightly at the words and the look on his son's face. He knew that it was because of him that Naruto was feeling the way he was at the moment and could only hope the young Uchiha, Naruto, had made his friend wouldn't break his heart. Sasuke stared at Naruto before nodding slowly. Human sacrifice. And your dad did this to you? Sasuke asked, now more curious than afraid. No matter what Naruto said he was still acting like Naruto, his friend. Naruto bit his lip but replied. Yes, the vessels of the Baiju are considered sacrifices because of what being a Jinchuriki means. My dad did do it. But I don't know he's my dad. Naruto finished uncertain and Minato listened carefully. Sadly, Sasuke was giving Naruto his full attention and showing that, which he rarely did. I was angry at first, and scared, but it made sense after I thought about it. I was still mad though at my dad for what he did, at everybody that looked at me that way, with hatred and fear. I hated them all. Naruto stated, his fist clenching at his sides. Minato shut his eyes tight as if it would make the pain that the words his son was saying disappear. Sasuke's eyes never left Naruto, but he shivered slightly at hearing that Naruto had hated them all. Not only that, but his voice had been so hard when he said it. But that was a long time ago. Things are better now. I have friends, people who care, and at least my dad treats me like a person, and doesn't hate me. It's not being a vessel to a demon that's so bad. It's how you're treated because of it. Naruto finished biting the inside of his cheek to keep from getting emotional. Sasuke felt badly for doubting who his friend was. He had known Naruto forever, he should have known better. Minato turned away. It had hurt to know how much he had hurt his son, but he knew he dissevered all the pain because he had made his son feel much worse. He barely thought about Naruto being the Kyuubi's vessel and what that might be doing to him, because Naruto always seemed so happy, and maybe he was now, but Minato knew from Jiraiya he definitely hadn't been in his first life. The Yondaime turned away and headed over to see why and whom all his son's clones were beating up. He didn't want to interrupt the boy's moment or be caught eavesdropping. Sasuke didn't look like he was afraid anymore. They would be fine. Why didn't you tell me? Sasuke asked. Naruto frowned and looked away. He didn't want to tell Sasuke he was scared, but what else could he say? I know exactly who I am, Mizuki, and I also know you just stole the forbidden scroll, traitor. Naruto did growl the last part. As if on cue, an alarm sounded from the village. Sasuke immediately came to see the scroll behind the Chunin to see it was indeed the forbidden scroll, even though he'd only seen it in the Hokage's office a few times when waiting to hang out with Naruto. He could tell. The Uchiha took a defensive stance slowly while never taking his eyes off the now identified enemy shinobi. Who are you calling a traitor, you little monster? Mizuki's anger grew as the demon talked back to him, actually judging him. Naruto flinched as the words screamed at him, which Sasuke saw out of the corner of his eye. It was onto him. With Naruto's pranks he was yelled at all the time, but Sasuke decided to save the question for later. Unfortunately, Mizuki also saw the flinch at his words and smirked, deciding to use the word monster from now on. Oh, so you do know what I'm talking about. I don't suppose your friend knows too though. No, if he did he would never go near you again. Nobody would. Mizuki turned his head to Sasuke. He need to keep moving or he'd be caught, but he could spare a few moments on revenge. Naruto tensed, his own anger now rising at the traitor daring to out him to Sasuke. Don't. Naruto spoke harshly, preparing to attack the Chunin. What are you talking about? Sasuke asked, annoyed at not yet knowing what's going on. Mizuki smirked. Well, Uchiha, what you don't know about your little friend is, he is the Kyuubi. Mizuki laughed before Naruto finally made it to him and kicked him in the head hard enough to throw him off the branch he'd been standing on. Naruto cursed he'd been seconds too late, and Sasuke had heard. He'd heard it from Mizuki. The blonde Jinchuriki had planned on telling his friend soon now that they were ninja, but he wanted to tell Sasuke himself, to explain it right. Not daring to look back and see Sasuke's reaction, Naruto attacked the Chunin furiously, taking his anger out on the traitor. Mizuki trembled in rage, that the new Chunin was beating him, that the demon he hated so much who took away the love of his life was defeating him so easily. In his rage, Mizuki Mizuki lashed out hard with his fist and surprised Naruto, hitting him full force in the stomach. Naruto grunted in pain as he felt two of his ribs break. The blonde mentally scolded himself for letting the weak ninja get the best of him because he was so mad and wasn't concentrating on the fight. The 12-year-old jumped back to get some distance from Mizuki, before using his favorite jutsu. The Chunin stopped and stared in awed horror when he saw himself surrounded by hundreds of solid Naruto clones. Sasuke watched still stunned. The ninja said that Naruto was the demon fox that attacked just after he was born. On the day Naruto was born. At first he didn't believe it, but when Naruto didn't deny it, more and more things came together. Naruto had been keeping something from him, and he knew that for a long time, but since Naruto said he'd tell him one day, he let it go, figuring his friend just wasn't ready to talk about whatever it was. He had heard a few times people whispering in the village about Naruto being the one, or the hesitation some parents had when they were younger to let their kids play around Naruto. Then maybe the Hokage wasn't as overprotective towards Naruto as much as having more to worry about, besides being the son of a Kage. It was the last piece of information though that really stuck in his head. Kyuubi attacked the night Naruto was born, and Naruto has always had so much chakra. Not as much as a Baiju, but still. However, it was the fact that Naruto still hadn't denied it and hadn't even looked at him that was making him believe the traitor's words. Could Naruto really be the Kyuubi? Sasuke questioned himself as he saw hundreds of clones that he knew were supposed to take a lot of chakra each appear all around the traitorous ninja. How do you know anyway? Weren't you running from the Anbu and like everyone? Sasuke asked, sitting down beside the blonde and leaning on the cabin wall. Naruto smirked, scooting up to lean on the wall too. And miss all the chaos? No way. I had clones at all the compounds watching. Naruto chuckled as a particular scene flashed through his mind. Besides, I needed them there to set off the stuff. The range was too far apart to set them all off at once. So when I set off the first one, my clones started setting off the rest. Naruto explained. Minato's clone listened carefully and heard every word. He filed away his son's imaginative planning skills for later missions and focused on the fact Naruto just admitted to the crimes. After all, he didn't want to blame his son if he wasn't guilty, even if he was most the time. The clone retreated about a mile so that it wouldn't be heard and then dispelled, its memories transferring to its creator. Naruto and Sasuke sat together basking in their victory as they hid from everyone. Every once in a while they would chuckle at the day they'd had. Sasuke had never been a prankster in Naruto's first life, but they hadn't really been close friends when they were younger either. As it turns out, Naruto could easily corrupt the young Uchiha. It kind of reminded him of when he had gotten Sasuke to help find out what was under Kakashi's mask. They never did succeed. Next time. While Sasuke wasn't really good at thinking up a prank, he did contribute quite a lot to planning some out and helping to set them up. In exchange for helping with the pranks, Sasuke wasn't the target of any of the bigger ones, and would know before they went off where not to be. Which today, with what was going on at the Uchiha compound, he was extremely happy about. So did you get them? Naruto asked as he sensed to make sure no one was around. Sasuke smirked. Of course. The Raven replied, looking around before pulling out a bunch of pictures from his weapons pouch and handing them to Naruto. The blonde took them with sinister glee as he started looking through them. Oh my Kemi, did you see this one? Naruto laughed, pointing at one of the photos. Sasuke chuckled. It was of one of the Hyugas. Since they knew Naruto would be automatically be chased for the pranks, Sasuke had been the one to go around to all the compounds and get pictures for blackmail or personal reference. Like a scrapbook, maybe. Never know when you might need a laugh. Naruto started cracking up again as he found one of the Inuzuka photos. That one had been particularly funny. After going through all of them, Naruto split the photos so that they each had half the stack. Then they started trading for the ones they wanted more. Like trading cards. Kami, Naruto really has corrupted me. Sasuke thought while a flashback of his mother saying so came to him. Sasuke, 8 years old, walked in his home and took off his shoes. His mother, Makoto, came from the kitchen where she was cooking to greet him. Seeing him, she rolled her eyes and sighed. She had heard of Naruto Uzumaki Namake's famous escapades, and while the boy seemed to be getting more creative, many of them still included pain. That Namake's boy is really corrupting you, Sasuke-chan, Makoto said softly as she bent down and rubbed off the orange paint from her youngest son's nose. Sasuke blinked as she wiped his nose clean, and realizing he'd been caught, he smiled sheepishly. Makoto just shook her head with a smile and turned towards the kitchen. "Go wash up, sweetie, dinner will be done soon," she called back as she slipped into the kitchen. The young Uchiha shook his head of the memory. The Uchiha weren't as strict as they used to be, but that didn't mean he wanted to bring any more shame to his clan than what his father already had. What would his brother say? Itachi had been gone too long on that stupid mission. "Sasuke," Naruto said, pulling the raven from his thoughts. Sasuke turned to the blonde in silent question. "I think someone's coming," Naruto whispered, not looking up from the pictures. Sasuke was immediately on alert and moved his eyes around the area without moving his head as they'd been taught in the academy. A chonin carrying a large scroll on his back landed in a tree nearby and spotted them. Naruto and Sasuke quickly stood up, thinking they'd been found. As soon as Naruto got a good look at the man, though, he knew that wasn't it. The chonin with the large scroll smirked, seeing who he'd come across in the middle of nowhere. "Well, if it isn't the demon and his little friend." Mizuki laughed as he walked closer. Naruto and Sasuke both narrowed their eyes at the man for different reasons. Naruto lowered his body defensively, knowing Mizuki had turned on the village again, while Sasuke was confused but could feel the tension and watched the chonin carefully. "I'm not a demon," Naruto said, just barely keeping the word from being growled out, which he figured would defeat the purpose. Sasuke was tempted to add that he wasn't little either, but kept his mouth shut, realizing it would sound childish and unbefitting of an Uchiha. "What? Didn't anyone tell you who you are, filthy demon?" Mizuki asked with a smirk that almost looked like a snarl. The silver-haired man had stopped when he saw the demon and its playmate because of the anger he felt remembering how his fiancé had been killed by the demon's attack 12 years ago. Sasuke watched, listening, confused about what they were talking about, while Naruto seemed to know what was going on. That didn't happen often and was frustrating him, but he stayed calm and listened to figure it out. Naruto walked out of the academy leisurely with his hands in his pockets and the most suspicious grin on his face you'd ever see. He and all the soon-to-be Rookie 9 had just finished graduating, and he just couldn't stand the thought of not leaving a lasting impression. His dad still being there giving a speech was just a bonus. The new Jonin's grin just got bigger when he heard the loud ding go off behind him. White light came from all the windows and the ground beneath him trembled, but he didn't look back. He was almost out of sight when he heard his father, Naruto Uzumaki Namake's. Minato shouted, coming out of the academy covered from head to foot in peanut butter. As soon as Naruto heard his full name screamed, he burst out laughing and broke into a run. Minato was right behind him, and several of the academy teachers, who were also governing peanut butter, had already joined him. It would only be seconds before Anbu would be with them. Right on cue, Naruto jumped to avoid an Anbu that had come from the other side and tried to catch him. Minato couldn't believe he hadn't been able to catch his 12-year-old yet. Of course, the kid had been dodging his guards and several other ninjas since he could walk. The main problem was mostly that his son had apparently taken off all the hydration seals on the clothes he was wearing, because there wasn't any there that he could sense. Naruto had no intention of being caught this time. Before he'd let himself be caught, because really, where would he go when he lost them? Eventually he knew he'd have to stop, but this time he will have fully lost them when he did, just to prove he could. However, a little diversion never hurt, Naruto thought as he smirked, making a one-handed ram seal. "Kai," the blonde-haired 12-year-old whispered. Suddenly there was another explosion, but this time it was coming from the direction of the Inuzuka compound. Several of the ninja chasing Naruto turned to see a large white cloud surrounding the Inuzuka compound, and all the ninja, including Minato, stopped chasing the prankster, seeing the cloud and thinking the village could be under attack. Before they could go see what happened, though, there was several more explosions. shrieks started coming from every major clan compound, including howls and barks that were now coming from the Inuzuka compound. The only compounds that screams or explosions weren't coming from were the Hyuga, Nara, and Aburame. Mostly because Hyuga are too proud, scream, Naras don't care to waste the energy, and Aburame, well, they just don't scream. However, the Aburame's allies seemed to be agitated. If anyone was paying attention would notice, and if you were listening you could hear a slight ringing noise coming from the Nara compound. Minato went into what Naruto had dubbed his Hokage mode, and within a second was ordering the ninja around him to check the disturbances while two went for backup. The Hokage turns to tell his son what to do, but Naruto was long gone. Minato wasn't just worried about where his son was, though he knew Naruto, and right after pulling a prank or not, the kid would always put his village first and never just run away if he thought it was in danger. Which meant either his son ran right into whatever was going on, or he already knew what was going on and wasn't worried. Minato frowned before disappearing with a yellow blur to the Inuzuka compound. Within seconds he knew exactly why Naruto had no problems with using the explosions as a diversion. The kid had set them all up. All the people in the Inuzuka compound and their canine partners were scratching themselves like crazy and itching their backs on the grass. Even some of the ninja he just sent to investigate were starting to scratch. Finally getting it, Minato's eyes flashed fear before he disappeared in another yellow flash. He didn't need to be caught in the after effects of an itching powder bomb after all. He reappeared at the Uchiha compound and instantly flashed himself away again. His son definitely had his mother's sense of humor. The blonde Hokage's heart was beating fast after the scare at the Uchiha residence, and he reacted by going to the first place he thought of, his own home. He leaned against the wall closest to him and just stopped to catch his breath and think. 1. Naruto definitely did this, all of it. He was sure no one else would. 2. Naruto had set amusing and annoying if not terrifying traps in what seems to be all the compounds. Now what to do about it, and where would his son hide to lay low for a while? As he was thinking, Minato saw Sasuke, his son's best friend, run by through the window he happened to be facing, towards the training grounds. Minato lifted an eyebrow. It could be that Sasuke was just going to go train. He did do that a lot. The Hokage highly doubted it though. After all, who runs wasting their energy before they train? And Minato was sure he saw a small grin on the boy's face, and if he'd seen what was going on in his compound and didn't have peanut butter on him from the academy, then it was looking more and more that he'd been in on it. Speaking of peanut butter, Minato looked down and sighed at the brown sticky goop covering him. Deciding to have a clone follow Sasuke, Minato quickly made one, went to the bathroom and stripped before jumping in a nice hot shower. He ended up taking over an hour to scrub the partly dried goop off of him. He'd never admitted to anyone else, but to himself he would admit when his son did something he went all out. Meanwhile, Naruto was lying down in front of a cabin in the far-off training ground that in another life Mizuki had tricked him into going to. The blonde wasn't there to remember the weak shonen, though he was laughing his ass off as he hid, trying to catch his breath. His eyes closed tight from laughing so hard he didn't even notice Sasuke enter the training field. Alright, you can stop congratulating yourself, Baka. Sasuke said calmly, though he still had a smirk of his own. Naruto calmed down enough to sit up, but not even Sasuke's insult could stop the few chuckles that were still coming. Did you see your clan? That was priceless. Naruto dissolved back into laughter, and Sasuke couldn't help but chuckle at the mental image of his uptight clan receiving the full Uzumaki treatment. Distracted by their conversation, neither boy noticed the blonde Hokage watching them. Naruto shook his head to rid himself of the thought before he jumped in. He had to remember he had been just as bad as all of them the first time around. But still, if he hadn't seen it for himself, the only ones he would think would become great ninja were Hinata and Sasuke. He would put himself in there too, but he was biased. They were the only ones not arguing. Sasuke because he was too cool to care about any of it, or at least show it. Hinata because she didn't like conflict and was shy. As for himself, well, he was having his deja vu moment. It seemed to give him a bit more clarity, like he was thinking through his older mind instead of just remembering things. Maybe it was because he was getting older. I will introduce your new Jounin sensei in the afternoon. Meeting adjourned until then. Naruto called out and the class dispersed for lunch. Naruto had no intention of going to tie Sasuke up and transform into him to hit on Sakura like last time. However, they were on a team now, so he should try and get them together and talk or something, bond a little bit. As his eyes caught a sad Hinata walking out of the classroom with her head down, he figured first thing first and hurried after her. He caught up to her quickly but stayed back, following her until the other students had spread out to eat lunch at their separate areas. Hinata turned around to sit at the trunk of a tree in the courtyard. However, she tensed seeing her crush only few feet away when she turned. Naruto smiled softly at her, shoving his hands in his pockets sheepishly, and she couldn't help but smile back at him. Hinata shyly poked her fingers together soft and slowly, her face blushing slightly but not enough that she felt uncomfortable. Naruto chuckled under his breath seeing it. He always found her blush cute once he knew why she did it. "Naruto-kun? Would you like to sit with me?" Hinata had said it so quietly that he almost didn't hear her. Plus she wasn't looking at him, which made it hard to lip read. Naruto's face broke into a huge grin when he heard her whisper, "I'd love to." Naruto practically chirped as he plopped down next to her, closer than she intended him to, not that she was complaining. "I know he didn't get on the same team Hinata-chan, but I don't want to lose you. So I was thinking, maybe we could hang out after training with our teams or something." Naruto spoke hesitantly. Normally he showed confidence as plainly as the whiskers on his face, but even he can show himself to be insecure when asking a girl to basically not leave him behind. Yes, he was pretty confident she liked him because she had ended up with him in his first timeline, but to find evidence of this time being different than his own, all he had to do was look around him. As much as things looked the same, he knew things had changed. He could see it in almost all of his classmates, including himself. He just hoped nothing he did changed Hinata's love for him, because he missed her. "I'd like that," Hinata said softly, trailing off and turning her eyes away, but a sweet smile on her face. Naruto beamed at her. It reminded Hinata of the warm glow of the sun, and she wished she saw him smile so happily more often. "Great. How about we meet every day on top of the Hokage mountain, before sunset, after our training? If we can't make it that day, by the time the sun goes down we'll just know the other isn't coming. 'Cause I'm sure your dad would worry if you were out too late after dark." Naruto made the plan and smiled as the Giri next to him nodded, her mid-length hair swaying forward slightly. He wasn't quite sure when she started letting it grow, but he had a hunch it was around the time he had said something offhand about liking girls with long hair. That was about a year ago. Now Hinata's hair reached the bottom of her neck. Her bangs though were still cut out of her face, a lot like when they were 15, which suited him just fine. Her hair was beautiful. "I'll try to make it." Hinata looked directly at him finally. She had been upset that they weren't on the same team, but as long as she would still see him she was happy. Naruto coming to her and being the one to suggest it though made her very happy. Naruto's smile never left his face but dimmed slightly as he got up. "Well, I should find my teammates. I'll see you tomorrow?" Naruto's blue eyes were hopeful, his grin more like his usual, confident self. "Tomorrow," Hinata repeated. The shy girl's own soft smile calmed the boy's active mind and soul. Reluctantly Naruto stepped back and turned around to unite his teammates. At the door to inside the academy he paused and turned back on some kind of instinct to see she was still watching him. He gave her one last smile before going inside. Inside he went up the stairs and straight to where he knew Sasuke ate lunch. Since they were already friends it would be easier than talking to Sakura first. Especially since he was pretty sure Sakura still was one of Sasuke's pain in the ass fangirls, and still didn't like him very much. Probably because of her mother. Whenever Sakura's mother saw him she would frown at him. Not quite hatred, but probably holding a grudge. Whatever, most the villagers were nice to him, or at the least civil, but a few would look at him like Sakura's mother did. Even less though glared at him with the hatred that he had gotten at this age the first time, so for now he was content. He knew all they needed was time. And for him to save their collective ass a few times, but he would dwell on that. After all, he had most of everything he ever wanted. He had family, not a lot but still more than he thought he'd get. He had friends, many more than he'd had at this age before, and he would only gain more. And most importantly, he had a second chance to save them all. Should he really ask for more? No, he'd give the ones like Sakura's mother time to see the real him. He had more important things to do than worry about what stupid people needed to blame him for to make themselves feel better. Naruto woke up slowly. When the sun from his window finally reached his eyelids, he closed his eyes a little tighter and rolled over, pulling his blanket over his head. He snuggled into his pillow and just enjoyed not having to move. After a few minutes he rubbed his eyes, still under the covers, and pulled the blanket back slightly so he could see the clock beside his bed. The boy groaned and purposely rolled out of his bed and onto the floor with his butt hitting the wooden floorboards. It was already a little past when he was supposed to get up and go to the academy. And falling out of bed is the quickest way he knew to get up, without falling back asleep. Yawning tiredly, Naruto crawled to the night table and stood up while holding the little table. As he sighed deeply, he realized his ribs that Mizuki had cracked yesterday no longer hurt. He smiled to himself as he took another deep breath just to be sure. He really loved that most injuries he got would heal overnight. His dad hadn't even noticed this time, not that it was really a secret, he just didn't want his father to worry. Still half asleep, he went through his morning routine. After rinsing his face, he felt much more awake and started running around putting his clothes on for school. Gonna be late, gonna be late, Naruto chanted as he grabbed his shuriken pouch and secured it to his pants in a practiced move. Glancing at the clock again, he breathed in slight relief. He still had 10 minutes and he just needed to grab a breakfast bar on his way out. He could just make it, if he hurried. The blonde ran downstairs, passing his dad at the breakfast table so quick Minato felt wind pass him and jumped at not sensing anything before he noticed it was Naruto. "Good morning," Minato said, amused as he looked over his paper to watch his son hop up to grab a breakfast bar off the top shelf. Naruto turned to him and smiled brightly. "Good morning," Minato said, amused as he looked over his paper to watch his son hop up to grab a breakfast bar off the top shelf. Naruto turned to him and smiled brightly. "Morning, Dad, I gotta go. Bye," Naruto said quickly while running out the door so swiftly that Minato blinked twice before chuckling and going back to reading his paper. Naruto ran down the dirt street for a block and jumped up to the roofs. He opened his breakfast and almost choked when he jumped to the next roof while taking a bite. Naruto ran into the academy and down its halls at a sprint and slid through the doorway just before Iruka could close the sliding door. Inside, he panted as he trudged up the steps to sit beside Sasuke as he did most days. Sasuke smirked when he saw the blonde. "Wake up late, Dobi?" Sasuke asked. He knew Naruto wasn't the dead last in their class or even dumb, but one day he had just randomly called his friend Adobe while they were arguing and Naruto had such a reaction to it Sasuke decided to use the word more often. Naruto's face twitched at the name. "Yay, did you bring the stuff?" Naruto avoided rising to the bait of that insult. He was actually becoming used to it. At first it surprised him since he hadn't been called that since his previous life, ironically still by Sasuke. "Yep," Sasuke replied with a smirk. They said nothing more as Iruka spoke up. "Starting today, you are all official ninjas, but you are all still new Jonin's. It's going to get harder from here," Iruka stated, though most of the class stopped listening as it started to sound like a lecture. Naruto looked over his shoulder and smirked at Hinata, who looked away shyly and smiled a small sweet smile, and Naruto turned back to face forward. "You all will be in groups of 3, where you will accomplish missions under a Jounin sensei," Iruka continued. Most of the girls at that moment turned to look at Sasuke thinking who's going to be in Sasuke-kun's team. A few of the girls even looked at Naruto, wondering who'd be with the Hokage's son. Hinata looked at him hopefully. "We've arranged the groups such that overall abilities are equivalent. I will now announce them," Iruka went on, oblivious to the class' childish thoughts. Naruto smirked since the teams were fixed, even though they were the way they should have been before he interfered. That thought stopped though as the 12-year-old time traveler cringed slightly when he felt Sakura, who was on his right, staring through him at Sasuke. Sasuke of course acted like he didn't notice as he gazed stoically the other way with his hands under his chin. Naruto knew his friend felt her eyes on him though because Sasuke was leaning slightly away. Naruto's eye twitched. This was ridiculous. The only reason Sakura hadn't tried to push him right out of her way to her Sasuke-kun like last time was because he was the Hokage's son and everybody knew he and Sasuke were best friends. Next, Team 7. Uzumaki Naruto. Iruka caught Naruto's attention with his name and Naruto looked back to the teacher. His name also got Hinata's attention, and Sasuke's but no one could really tell with him. Haruno Sakura. The next name was called out and Sakura deflated slightly but was still holding her breath. And Uchiha Sasuke. Iruka finished naming the members of Team 7. Yeah. Sakura shouted as most the other girls groaned. Hinata looked disappointedly at Naruto. Naruto was starting to think he should have asked his dad to switch Sakura with Hinata and Sasuke. Well, he was content to be with Naruto on the team but being stuck with one of his fangirls was bringing him down. And her victory dance wasn't helping. Iruka went on to list the rest of the soon-to-be Rookie 9 and they all had their varied reactions, most of which included being annoyed with their new teammates. Naruto watched in a deja vu moment, which he seemed to be getting more often. How in the hell do we end up surpassing Konoha's strongest ninja? Naruto thought to himself as he watched his classmates bicker about stupid things, like Shikamaru sleeping, Choji being chubby, and of course who got to be on Sasuke's team. Why wasn't it Naruto's team? Hey guys. Naruto called happily to all the soon-to-be Rookie 9. His eyes flickered briefly to Hinata and she blushed. He was wondering if he could get her standing under the mistletoe that he'd put up earlier. After about an hour all his friends had spread around the room and he was going to try his luck with Hinata. But chickened out. Naruto sighed and vowed when they graduated he would kiss her before the end of the Chunin exams. His determination strong he went toward the kitchen to get himself a drink. At the same time Sasuke was coming out. Naruto was about to say hi when someone behind Sasuke rushed out accidentally pushing Sasuke forward. Sasuke fell toward Naruto with a look of horror on his face. The same look was mirrored on Naruto's. They fell to the ground in the middle of the kitchen and the hallway with Sasuke on top and their lips pushed together. For a second no one moved. Then all hell broke loose. Ew. Naruto shoved Sasuke off of him and wiped his mouth on his sleeve. Both boys got up with scowls on their faces. Some of the adults that saw laughed. Sasuke's fan club looked mortified and Hinata. Well, she stood in shock for a moment before fainting. After Naruto and Sasuke beat up the moron, who happened to be drunk and headed to the bathroom to puke when he pushed Sasuke. Naruto took Sasuke to the side of the room where hopefully no one was watching or listening to them. That, Naruto pointed toward the kitchen opening where the dread scene had happened. Never happened. Sasuke nodded and they split up not wanting to be seen together right now. Naruto cursed himself when he looked at the scene of the crime again. The mistletoe he hung was right over the kitchen entrance. He should have just sucked up his courage and gone after Hinata. Now he was stuck as his first kiss with Sasuke, again. Sasuke sighed as he washed his face in the sink of the bathroom. He really did miss his brother, but every few months Itachi sends in a mission report and a short letter to Sasuke and their mom to let them know he is okay. After using the toilet Sasuke stepped back to the sink to wash his hands, his mind now going over what he learned about his friend today. It was like everything had just changed, like he didn't even know Naruto anymore. His mind knew that wasn't true though he just felt hurt Naruto hadn't trusted him sooner, but he understood it was important no one knew and they had both been just kids. His mind caught there. When did Naruto find out? How long had he been keeping such a big secret? Sasuke took a breath he'd asked later. Drying his hands Sasuke thought it over pushing his slightly hurt feelings aside for the moment. He knew Naruto still acted the same after he found out. It didn't change his friend, but did it change what he thought of his friend? Thinking it over he knew it shouldn't. And as long as Naruto didn't change into some kind of monster, Sasuke decided it didn't matter. Coming back down the hall Sasuke smelled the food cooking and gave a small smile. His mother's cooking was always delicious. Walking a little closer, Sasuke's smile turned her into a smirk. He could smell the desert, his mother's homemade sugar cookies. Being as quiet as possible, Sasuke snuck into the kitchen to grab one as his mother's back was turned. Just one, Makoto called, not even bothering to turn around as Sasuke jumped, knowing he'd been caught. "I don't want you spoiling your dinner," she finished. She didn't even turn around. How does she do that? Sasuke thought, with a frown before sighing and taking just the one he was allowed. He was sure she would know if he took more. Later that night, Naruto walked home with his father. He was rested from the nap he took in the office, though his father looked tired from having to read and go through so many papers. Minato's mind was weary. He just wanted to fall into his bed, though he didn't use his teleporting jutsu, mainly because he'd been too tired to think about it in the office, and now they were close enough that it seemed ridiculous. "Did you make sure the teams were right?" Naruto asked, briefly looking to his dad before looking back to where he was walking. Minato took a second to let the question process, and then nodded. "Yeah, they actually would have been the same regardless. The teammates you said had a Hyuga, a Barame, and a Inuzuka. They are all tracker types, while having their own set of separate skills and usually work well together. Without your knowledge they would clan. When they become chonin, it is up to one of the Sarutobi to give them a symbol of their growth and show they are adults." Minato stated in an almost bored tone and yawned. He really was tired. Put on the same team normally. Team 10 is basically the next generation of the Inoshikacho team, which was a great success, plus the fact their families have an agreement with the Sarutobi. "What about me and Sasuke and Sakura?" Naruto asked, turning to the taller, almost carbon copy of himself. Minato answered without thinking. Normally he would tell anyone in the class what teams who would be on, but Naruto needed to know because he was trying to protect Konoha. That was a bit more tricky. It was prefect the first time when you were at the bottom of the class. All three of you would have balanced out perfectly, and with being the most likely out of the remaining graduates to become Chunin, it was the most logical. Now though you were basically showed to be on level or at least close to everything with Sasuke except for a written test, it wasn't as balanced with Sakura. Minato sighed, taking a breath as he opened the door to their home and walked in. Normally I probably would have switched her with Hinata, giving teammate a strong mind to guide them, despite that fact Sakura's personality would clash with Kiba's. It would make both teams stronger if they could learn to work together. Minato paused but shook his head. Naruto almost stopped him to scream. He wanted Hinata on the team but stopped, knowing that would mean they wouldn't become like the second Sannin. Maybe not even pass Kakashi's test for some stupid reason. Or it would just change everything so much and he would have no idea what to expect in the Chunin exams either. Naruto sighed, in begrudged acceptance. "But the three teams you told me about, Team 7, 8, and 10, are still the most likely to pass," Minato stated. "Now I'm going to bed. You should get some rest too. You have a big day tomorrow," Minato said as he ruffled his son's hair on the way towards the hall where he would soon find his room and sleep. Naruto frowned as his father messed up his hair. He put his hands up to fix it but knew it was always like that. Puffing at his eternally messy hair, he went to make himself a quick cup of ramen before going to bed. Omega, Naruto's Christmas. Christmas was amazing. A 10-year-old Naruto thought as he hurried home with presents in his arms. A wide smile was spread across his face. He had never been very happy around Christmas or any holiday in his first life because most of the time he was alone. Now though Christmas was his favorite, there were presents and everyone he knew was coming over for a party. Naruto ran through the front door at top speed, only throwing a "hey dad" over his shoulder before he was in his room and shut the door behind him. After dropping the presents on his bed, he got to rapping, his smile never leaving his face. Soon the party had started downstairs, and it didn't take long for Naruto to hear it. Putting a bow on his last gift, Naruto brought the presents with him to the living room where he noticed all his friends. Naruto's smile widened seeing them, and he hurried to put all the gifts he'd gotten down with every else's. He went towards them as soon as his hands were free. "Alright, enough," Minato finally called out, grabbing everyone's attention. "As I see it, Naruto has caused your clans a scare as well as embarrassment, but no one has gotten more harm than an itching rash. Is that right?" Minato asked for their confirmation. They all nodded their heads, though most reluctantly, as they didn't approve of how mildly it was said. Naruto. Minato called his son up to his desk. Naruto grimaced but walked up between the powerful, angry, clan head, ninja to his father's desk. You will clean up every bit of the tricks you played today, starting with the academy. You will not be given anything but D rank missions for a long time. And you will apologize to each of the clan leaders, now. Minato ordered, flashing angry eyes at the boy. Naruto didn't want to do any of that, especially not apologize, because he wasn't really sorry. It was awesome. As soon as he opened his mouth to protest, though he shut it, his father actually looked mad. He would test later, when his father had cooled down. Slowly Naruto turned around to where he could see the clan leaders watching him expectantly. Gritting his teeth, he took a breath, knowing what he had to do. I apologize. He stated, not sorry, but apologize. For what? His father asked behind him. He was about to snap out something about the poor security but thought better of it. For setting all the alarm clocks I could find to go off every minuet in your compound. Naruto said, looking at the Nar leader, before turning to the Inuzuka leader. And from making an itching powder bomb go off in your compound. He wasn't finished as he turned to the Hyuga leader and for tie-dyeing all the Hyuga's clothes. Naruto cringed, saying that he had absolutely no regrets about making the stuck-up clan more colorful. Hinata loved it. And for using potato chips as bait to lure your clan into a paintball trap. Naruto said, fighting the smirk as he turned from the Akamichi leader to the Yamanaka leader. And from making your plants overgrow your shop to scare Ino. The Yamanaka narrowed his eyes at his daughter's name. She had been scared. And would probably try and strangle the boy next time she saw him. Finally Naruto turned to the Uchiha leader. And for, well, the chaos I put your clan through. Naruto said, though that was the one he was least sorry for. It was hilarious if you asked him. The other clan leaders looked at Shiyoko Uchiha as her clan was the only one the boy seemed to think it was too horrible to speak about. Shiyoko though gave nothing away, actually she had never said what happened with them. Minato knew though and shivered at the memory, my kami have mercy on them. Alright, you all may leave, he will be at your compounds to clean up within the next few days. Minato stated and they all nodded before filling out the door. Naruto shifted nervously from foot to foot as they all left and his father stared at him. Finally, after what seemed like forever to Naruto but probably only a couple of minutes, Minato spoke. You really need to stop doing this. Minato stated and broke eye contact, no longer staring down his stubborn son. Naruto pouted, and huffed before replying. I know, but I won't be able to do things like this anymore, since I'm a ninja. I want it to go out with a bang. Naruto stated glumly though smirked at the end while mentally adding, at least not as much. After all, for him to stop being mischievous, would be like Tora not running away. It just didn't happen. Minato almost gasped in relief and would have hugged his little troublemaker if he didn't catch himself and decided to see it for himself. Because really, even taking a few seconds to think about it, he had his doubts about his son's retirement. You're still cleaning everything up, Minato stated as he started going through the papers on his desk. Not really looking for anything, just organizing things a little better so he would know what to do later. Naruto huffed again, crossing his arms with a pout. His father didn't even so much as look up so he could try his cute innocent face. Naruto started towards the door when it seemed his father wasn't going to say anything more. Naruto, Minato called before his son got more than a few steps. Naruto turned back. Here late because of your little stunt, then so do you. The blonde Hokage ordered. Naruto's eyes widened, then his jaw dropped in indignation. Look at us with a frown that looked more like he was still pouting. Minato didn't look up but knew the boy was listening. Sit, if I have to stay but. Naruto tried to think of anything that would make it fair for his father to stay and not him, but there wasn't one, not a good one anyway. The 12-year-old groaned and walked over the couch, plopping down with a huff, his arms crossed, and eyes narrowed. He was trapped until his father finished the cursed paperwork that never ends. Should I tell him? Naruto thought, wanting to get out faster, even though he didn't really have anywhere to go. Naruto shook his head slightly after eyeing his father. No, it wasn't worth getting out of there. Yet, the idea he had about using shadow clones to get paperwork done faster was worth a lot more than one early reprieve. Besides, then he might not be allowed to use his clones for menial labor, like cleaning his room. The 12-year-old time traveler shook off his annoyance at being stuck in the office and settled into the couch in a more comfortable position before closing his eyes and letting sleep slowly take him. Sasuke got home well before his aunt. His mother though noticed him come inside. Luckily for him, she just sighed with a small smile and told him to wash up. Sasuke had smiled at her. Really, he loved his mom a lot. He would probably break into a million pieces if anything ever happened to her. After he made sure whoever did it paid with interest, the young raven walked down the hall to the washroom, his eyes resting on his older brother's bedroom door for less than a second before looking back in front of him. Itachi had been gone a long time. The Hokage only would tell him it was a highly classified, long-term mission, and that if anyone asked he would have to say he didn't know where Itachi was or why he left. Sasuke hated that, talking about his brother like he was some kind of deserter. His brother was the best ninja the Uchiha clan had produced since, well, at least the last 3 generations. Now though he was the Uchiha clan heir instead of his older brother, it just felt like he was living a lie. He was living a lie. It had been almost 4 years now though, and he was mostly used to it. At least Naruto knew, so he could talk more freely with him, and didn't have to worry about his best friend bad-mouthing his brother, Gomen. Hinata said, ducking her head a little. I just haven't come up here before and I wanted to make sure I could find it, she explained, shifting her feet nervously. Naruto's smile never left his face. Don't be sorry, I'm glad you're here. You came just in time to see the sunset over the village. Sit with me? Naruto asked, holding out his hand towards her and hoping he wasn't asking too much, too soon of the shy Hyuga. Hinata smiled softly and took his hand timidly but sat down beside him without fainting, which Naruto took as encouragement and scooted a little closer to her. Though it was mostly to be closer to her, it was also to be in a better spot to catch her if she did faint. They were pretty high up. They didn't say much, they watched the sunset. Hinata was content with the moment, and the only thing Naruto wanted more was to be holding her in his arms, but he was sure she would faint then. Since she was holding his hand though and wasn't blushing too badly, he figured it wouldn't be too much longer before she would let him hold her and stay conscious. Naruto smiled at the thought and squeezed Hinata's hand gently but didn't turn to see her reaction. After a moment though, she squeezed his hand back and he relaxed. They stayed there like that until the sun dipped below the horizon and it became dusk. Naruto nudged Hinata gently as the sun finished dropping out of sight. She had slowly relaxed in his presence and was almost asleep, resting her head on his shoulder. He hated to wake her, but he was sure her father would be sending someone out to look for her if she wasn't home soon. Hinata hummed and slowly lifted her head when he pushed his shoulder slightly against her. Time to wake up time. Naruto spoke so softly it was almost a whisper as he shifted to get a better look at her. His eyes softened at her sleepy face. Of course, when she finally opened her eyes, Hinata's cheeks swiftly turned pink. She was still a little confused though, on whether she was in a dream or not, and stayed quiet waiting for her brain to catch up. I'll walk you home, okay? Naruto asked, trying not to smirk at her blush. He reached over her, grabbing her opposite hand and stood up, helping her do the same. Hinata nodded with a shy smile, still blushing though a little more than pink now. Thank you, Naruto-kun. She spoke softly and didn't look at him in fear of fainting. You're welcome time. Naruto smirked and began to walk slowly, not letting go of her hand. Hinata's heart sped up and her blush darkened at the endearing name he'd just given her. To her knowledge, since she never remembered hearing it before, she thought she was still in a dream when she heard him trying to wake her, but now she knew it was real. He called her princess. The happy smile on her face lasted long after Naruto dropped her off at her home. Later that night, Naruto lay awake in his bed staring up at the ceiling. He sighed though he had already made his choice and closed his eyes, pushing himself into his mind. When he opened his eyes again, he stood in front of the most powerful tailed beast in existence. and then he grinned up at him. The next day Naruto got up and looked at himself in the mirror. Seeing nothing different, he shrugged and went to get ready for Kakashi's test. Though he did so at a leisurely pace, knowing he wouldn't be later than his sensei. He didn't feel like starving himself again this time, so he also took the time to eat breakfast even though it was already past the time the team was supposed to meet. When he got to the training grounds, he was an hour late and noticed Sasuke was really not pleased. Sakura looked a little tired but still had the energy to sit close and talk a mile a minute to him, even though he wasn't even HNing back. When Sasuke spotted him, the Uchiha glared. Sakura did too, but for interrupting her Sasuke on time, rather than for being late. "Why are you so late, you sure Tenkachi?" Sasuke asked with an annoyed scowl. Normally he wouldn't care if his friend was late, but he'd been left alone with that fangirl for a whole hour, and she had never shut up. Naruto shrugged off his best friend's hostile tone, knowing exactly why he was upset. I got a little lost on the road of life," Naruto said with a smile. Sasuke's eye twitched, but what could he really say to an answer like that? Though Naruto was sure he heard the Uchiha mumble "idiot" as he sat down. The blonde just smirked, knowing he'd gotten under Sasuke's skin, which he loved to do. Another hour and a half passed before Kakashi showed up. "Yo." Kakashi appeared in front of the Jonin with his classic high smile, acting like he didn't even know he was extremely late. Sasuke frowned at the Jounin, while Naruto continued reading the book on seals he brought to pass the time. Sakura, however, grew a tick mark. "You're late," she yelled, stating the obvious. Naruto turned a page in his book, never looking up but his lips twitching into a smirk as he remembered himself always yelling that along with his timeline Sakura. Sasuke kept his face completely blank in his Uchiha stare, and Kakashi's smile never faltered. Yep, this was starting off nicely. "Alright kiddies, all you have to do to pass my test and become ninja is get these bells from me," Kakashi stated happily, holding up 2 bells. "If you don't get a bell from me by noon, you will be sent back to the academy for another year," Kakashi said, still far too happy in all 3 of his students' opinions. Sakura looked closer at the bells and blinked before half raising her hand like she was still in class. Sensei?" Sakura called Kakashi's attention to her. "Yes." The Jounin replied, wondering how she could have not understood what he'd said so far. While the ramen thing was almost expected from how much he heard the kid liked it, and the hobby with seals was interesting, it was the boy's dream that caught his attention. It wasn't the normal dream of a kid his age. Usually kids that age wanted to be a badass ninja or something like that. To wish for peace mostly came from older people who knew what it was like to not have peace, to see war. Mentally filing it away for later, Kakashi decided to move on to his next new student. "Okay, next," Kakashi stated, looking pointedly at Sakura. Catching his eye, she hurried to comply. "I'm Haruno Sakura. Well, the person I like is..." Sakura looked over at Sasuke, who was doing his best to pretend she wasn't there. Naruto grinned widely, trying not to laugh as the girl went on. "And my hobby is... well, my dream is to..." Sakura giggled and then made a squeal into her hands, while still glancing suggestively at Sasuke. "And what do you hate?" Kakashi asked, hoping for something better than more fangirlism. Honestly, it was hard for him not to grin. He had fangirls at Sasuke's age. Luckily for him, there was a war, so they died off pretty quickly. "Naruto. Indino pig," Sakura stated bluntly. Naruto flinched, and frowned at her to cover up it had hurt. He still remembered her when they were friends, but that was another time, and hopefully they'd be friends again. Girls at her age must be more interested in love than ninja training. Kakashi hummed in thought before moving on. "Last guy." The Jounin turned slightly towards Sasuke. "My name is Uchiha Sasuke. I hate the girls who stalk and chase me around town, and there aren't a lot of things that I like, other than learning new jutsu. My dream is my goal. I will restore my clan, and kill a certain man," Sasuke said, refusing to look at the girl with hearts in her eyes even as he talked about hating fangirls. Naruto was sure his friend had moved behind him more, trying to hide subtly from her. It sounded almost the same as the first time Naruto remembered Sasuke introducing himself to the team, but Naruto could notice the differences. Mostly it was the fact he knew the man Sasuke wanted to kill wasn't his brother anymore, it was the guy in the orange mask. Plus he had actually given a few details about himself, not many but still. Alright, you three all have unique personalities. I like that. We're going to begin mission starting tomorrow. Kakashi said, I smiling. What kind of mission? Naruto asked, though he already could guess. Survival training. The Jounin chirped too happily. Why are we going to train when it's a mission? We had plenty of training at the academy. Sakura asked, confused and disappointed. Kakashi went on to explain about the training and looked especially gleeful, telling them the test had a fail rate of 66% and that they'd probably go back to the academy. Naruto looked surprised, though he wasn't. Sakura looked scared, and Sasuke looked determined not to fail. Before he left, Kakashi told them when and where to meet him tomorrow and that they shouldn't eat breakfast or they'd just be puking it back up later. The three teammates stared blankly at where he disappeared in a swirl of leaves before getting up and leaving themselves. They all had many thoughts about what they were going to do tomorrow. On the way out of the academy though, Naruto got Sasuke's attention and they took off in the same direction before Sakura noticed or could follow. Later that day Naruto walked through the village with a smirk most of the villagers knew to be wary of. Naruto paid them no mind though as he walked towards the Hokage mountain. Hinata wasn't supposed to meet him there until tomorrow, after training or in his case after the bell test. Come to think of it, he didn't know what kind of test Hinata would have. The blonde mentally shrugged, he was sure she'd pass. However, even though he knew Hinata wasn't supposed to meet him there today, he had nothing to do and felt pulled there. He didn't know exactly why, but he always felt better up there where he could see the whole village, and while he always had lot of energy, on top of the mountain he felt calm enough to think deeper. Finally arriving at the top of the long trail up the mountain, Naruto walked straight to the edge completely unconcerned of falling off and sat down with his legs dangling high above the ground. He breathed deeply and smiled as he leaned back on his hands. His eyes went over the village, stopping a few times on the places he went to more often, like the Hokage Tower, the academy, the direction of his home that he couldn't see behind the other buildings, and of course Akiraku's. The colors in the sky were beautiful as the sun began to set, and Naruto hoped tomorrow's would be just as nice so he could share it with Hinata. Naruto's eyes that had closed in the calming atmosphere opened at hearing a noise from behind him. He didn't move as he sensed the natural energy around him but didn't take it in like he would to go into sage mode. The boy smiled as he sensed who was behind him. You can come out. Naruto called calmly as he looked right to where he knew she was. He heard a small lip and his smile turned into a grin. She came out from behind a tree, slowly looking down. The blonde boy watched, taking in everything. The way she tapped her two index fingers together gently, how she looked down, the way her hair swayed slightly in the breeze. He felt his heart thump in his chest. She really was beautiful. You know, we weren't really supposed to meet here till tomorrow, Naruto stated, not knowing really what else to say. What problem? Naruto asked, still looking up at the large kitsune. Your chakra. There was too much of it when we returned. As it was nearly depleted when we got here, it wasn't a problem, but since it's recovered I've been trying to balance it, Kurama stated. What happens if you can? And what about your chakra? Naruto asked, feeling a lump grow in his stomach. The Kyuubi's tails waved in irritation behind him. I am a chakra being. My chakra, both of me and my other self, fused together within the seal. Your chakra that came back with you tried to do the same, but since you were so young your body couldn't contain that much. Lucky at the time your chakra was severely drained, and since it wasn't completely fused to you it took a while to recover. Kurama explained impatiently as Naruto was giving him a dumb look. So, what now? Naruto asked as he started to understand he was most likely in a bad position. The fox's eyes narrowed in annoyance. There was too much of your chakra flowing through you, and I haven't done anything, but as your own chakra has grown, if something isn't done you will overload and die. Kurama said the last part in a flat voice, thinking if the brat understood anything it would be that. You can Either store your chakra in a seal like you've been doing to save extra chakra for later, though it will return quicker each time you do that, or I can focus the chakra into you and enhance your body so you will be able to contain it. The large kitsune drawled, bored. Enhance me? How? Naruto asked, scrunching up his face in confusion. I would be channeling the chakra into your body and blood. It would flow through every part of you. You would hear, see and smell better than you already do. You would heal faster on your own without my chakra, and other things may come, but that is as far as I know. Kurama said, looking thoughtful. It should just supercharge the kid's body, but you never knew. Naruto was known to be unpredictable. Naruto was about the answer when he was abruptly pulled out his mindscape by Sasuke shaking him. The blonde gasped as his eyes shot open wide and he almost fell out of his chair. He hated being pulled out of his mind like that. Once his chair was on all four legs again, Naruto turned to glare at the smirking Uchiha. Kakashi-sensei showed up, said that he didn't like us and to meet him on the roof. Sasuke answered the unspoken question of why he'd woken Naruto up while still smirking, unashamed at his friend's reaction. Naruto huffed and got up, pushing past Sasuke and his irritating smirk as Sakura stood by the door watching, and waiting for her precious Sasuke-kun. Sasuke followed, trying to stay as far from the pink-hair girl as he could while they went up the stairs. Soon they were on the roof and sitting down in front of their new sensei. Let's see, why don't you introduce yourselves? Kakashi broke the silence of the three kids staring blankly at him, since none of the kids seemed to be even thinking about it. Introduce ourselves? What should we say? Sakura asked before one of the boys tried to answer. What you like, hate, your dreams, and hobbies. Something like that. Kakashi answered with a shrug. Hey, why don't you introduce yourself first, sensei? Naruto cut in with a grin, wanting to see if Kakashi would give the same lame speech as in his first timeline. He wasn't disappointed. Me? I'm Hitake Kakashi. I have no intention of telling you my likes and dislikes. Kakashi paused for dramatic effect. Naruto's smirk widened. Sasuke just stared, while Sakura blinked, making a quiet huh? As for my dream, I have a few hobbies. Kakashi finished. Naruto snorted, turning his head away. Sasuke rolled his eyes, and Sakura turned to both of them. So all we found out was his name. Sakura mumbled to them and Naruto nodded. Now it's your turn. Kakashi chirped cheerfully, knowing that they had noticed he had just given them a bunch of words that didn't actually tell them anything. You first. He stated, nodding to Naruto. Naruto paused for a moment, wondering if he should give the same roundabout answer like Kakashi. However, it just wasn't in his nature. He loved telling people about himself, even if they already knew him. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I like cup ramen. But I like ramen at Akirako's even more. I hate the 3 minutes that I have to wait after I put in the hot water to cook, people who think they're better than others, and snakes. My hobbies are to eat and compare cup ramens, learning new jutsu, and I like seals. My dream is— Naruto cut himself off mid-sentence and frowned thoughtfully. What was his dream? Of course he had wanted to be Hokage, but was that really his dream now? What he wanted most? My dream is to make a better future, and to bring peace to the elemental nation. Naruto had to pause to find the right words, but he was sure of the words he said and he looked up with determination in his eyes. To say the least, everyone was staring at him, though Kakashi was the most surprised. From what he'd heard, his sensei's son was a hyperactive prankster that could give the Anbu a run for their money. Well, I just learned one. Last week when you asked Iruka-sensei about medical ninja having to have good chakra control, I looked into it a bit and tried one of the beginning exercises. It wasn't too hard and soon I got through the book and learned the beginner healing jutsu in it. Sakura stated proudly. Naruto looked at her stunned. His random question had gotten Sakura started in medical ninjutsu early. Sasuke was a little impressed but didn't really know how hard medical ninjutsu was, so couldn't know how it worked. However, he was thinking she may be less of a burden now. That's great, Sakura. Naruto snapped out of his shock and congratulated her. Sasuke even gave her a nod of respect, which he immediately regretted as she beamed at him. Kemi, couldn't she see he wasn't interested in a girlfriend right now? Naruto held back a groan as he rolled his eyes. 1 step forward and 2 steps back. Soon lunch was over and the bell rung. Naruto stood first with both his new teammates following him as they raced back inside the academy to not be late. They reached their classroom and took their seats as Iruka-sensei walked in. They sat down together, but Sasuke made sure to get the seat at the end so only one person could sit next to him, and Naruto rolled his eyes before sitting beside him, so Sakura sat on Naruto's other side. About an hour later, Iruka-sensei left as everyone but Team 7 had been picked up by their Jounin-sensei. Naruto sighed. Kakashi was always late no matter what world, timeline, or dimension. The Kyuubi had been awfully quiet for a while now, though the Jinchuriki knew his Baijo had been tired when they came back in time and said he was going to rest for a while, but it really had been a long time. Since he was just waiting anyway, maybe he should check on him? Shrugging, Naruto laid his head down on his desk. Wake me if he shows up, the blonde mumbled before pushing his mind inward to the place he knew the Kyuubi was. Sasuke's eyes rolled slightly but settled into his own chair to wait as Sakura frowned at the fact they were still waiting in the first place. Naruto opened his eyes to see huge bars in between him and a familiar kitsune. The blonde wrinkled his nose as he walked through the sewer water that reached his ankles. He knew that real. Ignoring the less-than-prefect surroundings, Naruto stepped up to the large gate. Wasn't real, but it still looked real, and felt Kurama? Naruto asked the fox, who seemed to be sleeping. One crimson eye bigger than Naruto's whole body opened to stare at him. The blonde smiled, completely unafraid. It's been a while, the boy stated. The ground shook as Kurama sat up. We have a problem, Kurama stated once he was sitting up. Pushing the thoughts away, he opened the door to the classroom Sasuke was hiding in, so his stalk fangirls wouldn't find him and he could eat his lunch in peace. Sasuke stilled, thinking he'd been found before he spotted Naruto and went back to eating his lunch. Naruto grinned and walked over to where Sasuke was sitting on the window ledge before hopping up on the desk across from his friend. Any for me? Naruto asked, though it sounded more like a statement. Sasuke rolled his eyes at the display, before holding out a rice ball. Do you ever bring your own lunch? Sasuke droned the partly rhetorical question. He knew perfectly well, Naruto had never brought his own lunch. Either they shared, Naruto share with Hinata, or he'd go to Akiraku's and hope he would make it back to class on time. Maybe. Wait, no, I don't think so. Naruto answered anyway, between bits. Sasuke rolled his eyes and sighed. His friend had admitted that far too casually for his liking. Honestly though, did he really expect Naruto to feel even a little embarrassed about that? So I was thinking, maybe we should go and talk to Sakura before we gotta go back to class, since we're a team now. Naruto brought up what he was thinking rather bluntly. Sasuke took another bit of his lunch before taking a deep breath, replying, Yay, I guess. Her screeching kind of hurts my ears though. I don't know why we had to get stuck with a fangirl, she'll be totally useless. Sasuke stated as he finished his lunch. I know, right? Every time she yells my ears ring, but she isn't useless. She is really smart. Even if she's physically weak now, she could still make plans or help us with long-range support. Naruto tried to defend Sakura even though he knew in the beginning, now, she wasn't much help. The blonde knew Sakura would grow and become a great Konoha in her own right. Sasuke replied, and Naruto knew, or took it to mean, Sasuke saw the point but didn't want to admit it. But what about what we were going to do today? The raven-haired boy asked after a moment. Naruto turned to the Uchiha with the devious grin most Konoha citizens knew to fear. Sasuke's own face slowly turned into a smirk as he took in the blonde expression. A few moments later, the two boys walked out the front door of the academy and found Sakura sitting on a bench close by eating her lunch. Hinata looked up as the door opened and saw them, so Naruto smiled at her when he and Sasuke passed her. The young Hyuga smiled back but didn't say anything when she saw they were going towards their third teammate, but wondered if maybe she should find her new teammates too and get a little better acquainted since she didn't know them very well. other than from class. Sakura looked up sensing someone was near her and was surprised and elated to Sasuke Uchiha, her year's Rookie of the Year and the prettiest boy she'd ever seen. And of course her longtime crush. On a side note, she noticed the Hokage's son, Naruto Baka, was with him. She tolerated Naruto Namake's for two reasons. One, he was the Hokage's son and her mother drilled into her to be respectful. And two, he was Sasuke-kun's friend, so if she wanted him to like her she'd have to at least accept his friend. For the moment. If she looked a little deeper she'd realize she didn't hate Naruto, but he just annoyed her so much. Those pranks of his, that he even brought her precious Sasuke-kun into at times, were so annoying. She still felt like she had peanut butter in her hair from yesterday. And then he was so loud. Always shouting how he's going to be a great ninja and stuff. As if his grades were average in most things but ninjutsu and weapon throwing. Hey Sakura. We were thinking since we're on the same team now we should get to know each other a little better. Naruto stated. Though she was disappointed it wasn't Sasuke who said it, she was ecstatic to get close to her Sasuke-kun. Okay. Sakura answered. She was talking towards Sasuke even though Naruto had been the one to speak to her. The girl scooted over so that her crush could sit next to her, but to her annoyance it was Naruto that took the spot next to her while Sasuke sat on his other side. Make that 3 reasons she didn't like Naruto. He always got between her and her Sasuke-kun. So 0. Naruto started after no one had said anything for a while. What do you like to do after class? Naruto asked, trying to break the ice. Kami knew Sasuke wasn't going to. Sakura blinked, registering the question before thinking about it. Usually she went home, finished her homework, while mostly skipping the practically exercises and then brush her hair in her full-length mirror before trying to see what makeup looked better on her. But none of that was really something she cared to tell Sasuke. I do my homework and then sometimes, I train. Sakura stated, thinking she needed to get a life. Naruto jumped to talk about the only thing he could. He couldn't stand that awkward silence again. We train after class too, almost every day. Naruto explained. The blonde turned to Sasuke hoping for some input, but the Uchiha leaned away, making it obvious he wasn't going to do anything. Naruto huffed and turned back to the pink-haired girl. Do you know any jutsu other than the Academy 3? Naruto asked. He knew she probably didn't, coming from a civilian family, but he was running out of things to say. Sakura hesitated. She really didn't train a lot and only learned the Academy jutsu so she could pass and stay with Sasuke, but there was one thing. As soon as he entered the clearing, Naruto tensed as he felt a wave of Kakashi's killer intent. Well, he must have noticed his book was different. In his still fuzzy mind, Naruto didn't even bother to flinch as Kakashi came at him and quickly tied him to the middle post. He was too exhausted to care. It wasn't like Kakashi would actually kill him, and honestly the rope was probably holding a good portion of his weight up. Kakashi noticed but didn't care that his little Jonin was tired at the moment. What did you do? Kakashi said, as menacing as he could. His book, it seemed, was full of childish drawings of Naruto beating him and no words telling the story of Kuka. Pushing his exhaustion back, Naruto put on his biggest, cheesiest smile. I'll tell you if you give me a bell. Naruto stated as Sakura finally arrived. Sasuke stood beside him now, face expressionless, but Naruto could tell he was impressed. Kakashi debated whether it would matter. After a moment he shrugged. Fine, fix it. Kakashi said, holding out the book and releasing Naruto's restraints. The blonde would have probably fallen on his face without the ropes holding him up, if Sasuke hadn't grabbed his shoulder and steadied him. Fell first. Naruto ordered, holding out his hand. Sakura's jaw had dropped in the background. But sensei, that's not fair. Sakura cried. Kakashi tossed Naruto a bell and gave Sakura a look that clearly said, that's life. Before he decided to explain, if you could get close enough to me to alter my book, then you would deserve a bell. Sakura. Naruto may not have done what he was supposed to, but he got it done all the same. Kakashi stated as Naruto held up a one-handed seal. Kai. He muttered and his chakra flared briefly. A previously invisible seal glowed before disappearing, leaving Kakashi's book back to normal. Good. Kakashi's eye smiled before swiftly tying Naruto back to the pole. Hey! Naruto complained with a pout, though he didn't really expect any less. He did mess with his teacher's precious. Kakashi didn't bother explaining why Naruto was tied to the pole as it was obvious. Right then, Naruto due to devious acts are the only one with a bell. So the question is, what are you going to do with it? Kakashi asked. Naruto frowned. This hadn't happened the last time. He didn't know what to do. Obviously he wasn't supposed to keep it for himself, but should he give it to Sasuke or Sakura? Naruto looked at Sasuke and then at Sakura before settling back on Kakashi. No. Naruto frowned at the Jounin, as he used his untied fingers to flick the bow back at Kakashi on the ground. Sakura twitched toward it like she wanted to go grab it for herself but knew she'd never make it. Sasuke was surprised though he didn't much look at as he turned to stare at Naruto before looking back at Kakashi. I refuse to go ahead of my friends or pick one over the other. No. Naruto stated, trying to stare as determinedly as he could at the Jounin who looked like he was judging his very soul. The blonde boy didn't waver. Ma, I see. Kakashi smiled, his serious face vanishing along with the tension Naruto now realized was Kakashi putting some chakra into the atmosphere just to freak out the little Jounin. Alright then, you're in the same boat as the others. Naruto thought about it as Kakashi was explaining to those who abandoned their comrades thing again and came to the conclusion that he had passed the test right there, and that the rest of the test was for Sasuke and Sakura. He couldn't be sure but it didn't matter, the rest of the test went about the same as the first time. Hey, isn't anybody going to let me down? Naruto yelled as he noticed everyone walking away. He really was out of it still. He didn't even notice it was over till they were walking away. Kakashi acted like he didn't hear him and Sakura looked back before she ignored him, like the first time. However, Sasuke sighed and came back for him. Naruto beamed as Sasuke cut the ropes. He was glad he'd befriend Sasuke earlier this time around. Thanks Sasuke. Naruto chirped even though he still felt drained. I have a date. He smirked with a wink as Sasuke rolled his eyes. See you later. The blonde called behind as he turned to go. Sasuke grabbed his arm though and Naruto turned back confused. Are you alright now? Sasuke asked and seemed to be looking him over as if he wouldn't say if he still felt bad, which was kind of true. Naruto's shoulders slumped as he stopped trying to fake energy he didn't have. Honestly, he didn't even know why he was doing it, a habit from his first life? It didn't matter, he supposed. He just didn't need anyone worrying or telling him he couldn't do something. I'm fine, just a bit tired. But I am not missing my first date. No way. Naruto stuck his chin up stubbornly like he really expected Sasuke to try and stop him and make him rest or something. Sasuke rolled his eyes again. I know you wouldn't. You love her. Sasuke stated it as fact and it was, but Naruto felt his face start to heat and turned away to hide his blush. Shut up, Tom. Naruto huffed and leapt away from a smirking Sasuke. Naruto sat tiredly on top of the Hokage monument as soon as he got there. He had never been this tired and he knew it was from the transformation. Even Kurama was deep in slumber, and the fox's peaceful snores were not helping to keep his Jinchuriki awake. He sighed. The sun was just starting to set, so he was on time if not a little early. He'd just rest his eyes for a moment. What? Naruto snapped as he finally opened his eyes to glare and see what was keeping him from his sleep. Sasuke was about to grin cockily but suddenly flinched back, not because of the harsh tone though. No, he was far too good at pissing his friend off not to know it well. It was the fact that Naruto's blue eyes had feral slits in them. In the silence Naruto's eyes had focused, the dark spots clearing and his fatigue lifting slightly. However, Sasuke's expression confused him. He looked kind of like a frozen deer. Naruto raised an eyebrow waiting for the Uchiha to say something. Of course he was never very good at waiting. Naruto pulled the word out impatiently. What is it? What's wrong? He was irritated and tired and really just wanted to sleep off the achy, hot, miserable feeling. Sasuke seemed to finally unthaw from his frozen state at that. Your eyes, they have slits, like an animal. Sasuke stated. Naruto blinked longer than usual, and when he opened his eyes again the slits were gone. Some of the Kyuubi's chakra must have leaked from trying to heal him. Sasuke relaxed slightly, seeing Naruto's eyes go back to normal. Better? The blonde asked, still leaning against the tree on the ground. Sasuke nodded, then Naruto's eyes went back to normal with his own Uchiha indifference back in place. As Naruto became more awake though, he noticed the forest smelled really strong. The smell of the grass and the trees and even the bark behind his back was starting to overwhelm him. His senses had been better than a normal person's already because of his partnership with Kurama, but not quite to an Inuzuka level, somewhere in between them and an average ninja. Now though he could smell everything, and the animal feces were not pleasant. He didn't even want to imagine how it would smell in the village when even now he was feeling nauseous. And then the sounds hit him. He could hear the crickets as if they were a raging band, and once he finally blocked them out he could hear animals skittering in the woods as if they were right next to him. Naruto jerked his head to the side looking for what caused one of the many sounds he was hearing to see nothing. Sasuke had been watching him and swiftly looked to where Naruto turned, thinking it could be Kakashi, but saw nothing. After scanning the area he turned back to the blonde in question. Naruto looked down at nothing and took a deep breath, trying his best to push everything else away. He ignored the skittering animals and focused on his breathing and then on Sasuke. "I'm fine, it was just an animal," Naruto said, standing up slowly. He still ached all over, but he was a ninja and he didn't have time to sit down and whine. He could do that later. "What happened with Kakashi-sensei? How long I been out?" he asked, still leaning on the tree behind him. Sasuke gave him an incredulous look. "You fainted, again?" Sasuke replied flatly, keeping his face blank as Naruto's face twitched a few times before he continued. "I couldn't move you obviously, so I set traps around us. I haven't seen Kakashi yet, but I heard Sakura scream over that way a few minutes ago." Sasuke gestured with his head towards the east. Naruto frowned. "Why didn't you go help her?" Naruto questioned, trying to keep the anger out of his tone. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Why would Naruto care about a girl that was always rude to him and was still an immature brat that was Fang Erling? "To go to her I would have had to disable enough traps to let me out, leave you undefended, and unknowing of all the traps I set around you, and I didn't know her exact location and there are only 2 bells, better she gets caught now," Sasuke stated as if it was simple fact. And really it was. Sakura was obviously the weak link, but it just frustrated Naruto to know and hearing Sasuke talk about a teammate like that. Maybe that was it though, she wasn't, or at least didn't seem like his teammate yet. "She is our teammate, Sasuke. Even if she is annoying now, we are a team. Teams are put in groups of 3s. Naruto tried the more logical approach, hoping Sasuke would realize at the least they needed her to pass. He just barely kept himself from repeating the old "those who abandon their teammates are scum" line, knowing Kakashi was bound to tell them soon. Sasuke looked surprised. Did they really need Sakura to pass? What about the bells? Why were there only 2 of them? Maybe that was the point? "Does that mean you want to go find her?" Sasuke sighed, rolling his eyes. It wasn't like Kakashi killed the girl. Why did Naruto have to be so dramatic? If Sasuke didn't know Naruto loved Hinata, he would have, though he liked Sakura. "Yes, we should go find her and make sure she's okay. See if we can come up with a plan to take Sensei down," Naruto declared, walking in the direction Sasuke had said. The girl screamed from before. Sasuke grabbed her shoulder and pulled him back. "The traps, remember?" Sasuke sighed again as he walked forward to disable them. Naruto chuckled and rubbed the back of his head sheepishly. He got so worked up over Sakura he completely forgot about the traps Sasuke mentioned. Though to be fair, his head was still buzzing with all the sounds and scents around him. Actually, he was pretty sure he was even seeing better and further, little details on things he'd never saw from the distance. It was kind of disorientating. Suddenly a loud ringer went off from the alarm Kakashi set. Naruto sighed as he and Sasuke made their way back to the training post in the clearing. They hadn't gotten a bell, and he stumbled every few steps, mostly because the ground looked closer with his enhanced vision, and partly because his head was still fuzzy. Sasuke jumped through the trees with caution, his onyx eyes looking for traps that could have been set while trying to find an orange form through the trees. It was a few minutes before he came to a small clearing and spotted his target, but something was wrong. The blonde bundle of energy was resting against the tree trunk with his eyes closed tight, breathing hard as if he was exhausted and in pain. The Uchiha carefully made his way closer, and after a minute of nothing but Naruto's heavy breathing breaking the silence of the forest, Sasuke jumped down. Naruto breathed deeply as he leaned his head back against the tree behind him and closed his eyes as he tried to ignore the burning feeling flowing through him. The blonde Jonin flinched and opened his eyes quickly though as he heard someone jump down just a few feet away. He was so out of it he hadn't even sensed them coming. Naruto relaxed back into the tree's trunk when he saw it wasn't an enemy. "Hey!" Naruto huffed out, still trying to catch his breath. Sasuke looked around as if still trying to figure out if the situation was some kind of trap. Kakashi left, but after a few seconds went by, that Naruto didn't even notice in his state. Sasuke traveled the last few steps between him and his best friend and knelt down. What happened? The raven-haired boy got straight to the point, as he looked over the other boy with his eyes for any injuries. Naruto heard and tried to focus enough to answer, but didn't think it could be put into a few words and didn't know just how much he wanted to say yet. With the fever fogging his brain, he figured the best option was to not say anything until he could at least catch his breath. "I'll be fine," Naruto managed to say, only stopping for air once. Sasuke gave him an Uchiha deadpan stare, which normally would be much more effective than a regular one, but Naruto had too much experience being on the other end of that look, so it was disappointing for Sasuke but not a surprise when his friend only chuckled. "No, really. I just did something earlier and it caught up to me." It was as close to the truth as Naruto wanted to say at the moment. He still felt unbearably hot, but his breathing was getting better by the second. "Great timing, idiot." Sasuke pointed out they were in the middle of an important test and his annoyance with only 3 words. Noticing his friend's flushed face, Sasuke reached his hand out without thinking to the other boy's forehead, just like his mother would always do. The reaction was immediate. He pulled his hand back quickly at the heat and looked at his hand. If the gesture startled Naruto, the reaction did. Almost as much. "What the hell, at that temperature you should be dead," Sasuke cursed, shaking his hand. At Naruto's confused face, Sasuke turned his hand around. It was burned. Not badly, thankfully, about the equivalent of a bad sunburn, red but not blistered. Naruto cringed, despite his own weakened state. The situation reminded him of when he'd hurt Sakura in his first life with the Kyuubi's chakra. "Sorry," Naruto mumbled in a voice very off from his normal confident attitude. The tone actually made Sasuke stop examining his hand and inspected the other boy's body language, which the best he could tell was self-blaming. Naruto surprised him though by reaching out and carefully putting his own hand over Sasuke's injured hand without touching it. A strange golden energy started glowing around Naruto's hand and slowly covered the burn mark. Sasuke was so surprised he didn't move. The gold chakra was warm, very warm but not hot enough to hurt, and then Sasuke felt the burn on his hand tingling. He stared in awe as the red skin faded to pink and then back to his natural pale-colored skin within seconds. Naruto lowered his hand tiredly as Sasuke examined his own newly healed hand. "How did you do that?" Sasuke asked curiously. Naruto looked at him tiredly, his eyes half closed but still managed to smirk. The old Sasuke would have demanded he tell him what he'd done. Or stare uninterestedly, his pride refusing to let him question someone beneath him. "I can't heal big things. Only things I understand. Burns are easy." Naruto diverted the question and Sasuke seemed to buy that, probably assuming it was some kind of rudimentary medical jutsu. As Sasuke looked over his healed hand, Naruto finally blacked out. When Sasuke looked back, he groaned. He couldn't even move his friends to somewhere more defendable because he couldn't touch him. Even if he could fight the pain long enough to get Naruto anywhere else, he doubted he'd be in any shape to defend Naruto, let alone get a bell from Kakashi. Sasuke sighed before looking around. He was going to have to set up some traps. They were already sitting ducks, they might as well double as bait. It didn't even occur to him to leave Naruto behind and go for the bells himself. Though he also didn't think of going to get Sakura. Of course he'd have to leave Naruto to do that, so if not going to find her came up later he'd have an excuse at least. Elsewhere Sakura wandered in the forest looking for her precious Sasuke-kun. Though at least she wasn't calling out for him and was trying to be quiet, Kakashi mused from above her as he watched from the tall tree he perched in. Oh well, she was still a fangiri that cared more about her crush and her hair than being a ninja. It was time to give her a small wake-up call, Kakashi thought as he weaved the genjutsu. Sasuke looked up sharply as a scream cut through the air. His eyes narrowed, he knew that screech. It was Sakura, though she sounded more terrified than, well, her normal screeches. He turned back to tighten the last razor-thin wire on the trap he was setting before settling down by his still unconscious friend and pulled out a kunai. Now all there was to do was wait, and hope his traps worked or at least buy enough time. After about 30 minutes of nothing, Sasuke scanned the surrounding area again before flipping his kunai around and using the ring den to poke Naruto. Honestly, he would have done it before, but his friend had looked so out of it he knew it wouldn't work. The blonde groaned softly but didn't bother moving his hand enough to swat at whatever was poking him. He was so tired. The thing just kept poking him though, and now it was pushing him in the arm hard enough to be really annoying. How was he supposed to sleep? Naruto's blunt eyebrows furrowed and he growled, turning his head toward the annoying thing but didn't bother opening his eyes. Sasuke paused, raising his eyebrow but mentally shrugged it off, shoving the other boy with the ringed end of his kunai again. Naruto breathed heavily, even more than from when he had just sprinted through the trees for 10 minutes. He walked wobbly to the base of one of the many trees around him and sat down to rest, just for a moment. He felt horrible, achy and burning up from the inside out. He knew what it was though. The transformation was starting. His body was reacting to the extreme amount of strong chakra Kurama had fused into his body the night before. The burning feeling must be from the chakra flowing through and fusing into his very blood. "There are only 2 bells," she stated, pointing at them. "And there's 3 of us?" She finished in a questioning tone, dropping the hand she was using to point at the bells. "Oh, that's right, there are only 2, so at least one of you is going back to the academy." Kakashi kept smiling happily throughout his whole reply. Sakura's eyes widened in fear and looked over at her competition. Naruto, while an idiot in her opinion, was still the Hokage's son and better at the practical exercises than most. And then there was Sasuke Uchiha, who not only was Rookie of the Year but she didn't want to take his place on the team because that meant she wouldn't be on the same team as her precious Sasuke-kun. Not to mention stuck with Naruto. No, this could only go one way. She had to beat Naruto and make sure she got a bell instead of him. Sasuke was thinking something similar, though he was thinking of cutting Sakura out and making sure only he and Naruto passed. Then he'd be rid of the annoying fangirl and only have to dodge his stalkers around the village. Naruto, while having an extra 18 years of memories, completely missed any clues that pointed to his teammates' competitive intentions. As he already believed he knew how things would go, and knew about the test, he wasn't really paying attention. He would regret it later. "Alright, to get these bells you'll have to come at me with everything you have." With the intent to kill, Kakashi began as he saw his students had no more questions, and before Sakura could protest his last instruct, he gave them the go-ahead. "Begin." Sasuke and Sakura disappeared into the nearby brush, but Naruto still stood where he was, grinning. He knew it'd be a better tactic to run and hide against a more powerful opponent. Well, he was more powerful, but Kakashi was still more skilled, so it would still be a good idea to get some cover, but he wasn't known to always take the logical path. "You're a little odd compared with the others," Kakashi said after staring at him for a moment. Naruto couldn't hold back a short laugh at that, thinking if he only knew. "You bet I am," Naruto called out, grinning and putting his hands on his hips. He held his head high. He didn't usually look away and feel bad about being different anymore. At times, like now, he felt proud to be different. It meant he was unpredictable, special, and completely himself. Of course there were times he felt down, like when one of the villagers who still didn't like him said something harsh, but most of the time he held his head high. Kakashi smirked under his mask, probably not thinking Naruto would notice, though he did. It was unusually for a Chunin to accept himself so fully like that. Not that he was going to let it show that the kid's resolve impressed him. With that thought, he pulled out his favorite book and began reading, thinking it would annoy the boy into being reckless. To his unease, Naruto's grin stayed, but it turned devious. Kakashi felt a shiver go down his spine, though he made no outward sign of discomfort. The blonde boy knew he needed his teammates to pass the test, but there wasn't any harm in having some fun first, right? Sensei, you know how sometimes kids trade their lunches. Well, as long as they're not clan techniques, shinobi kids tends to trade jutsu. Naruto's grin grew, and the silver-haired man tensed, readying himself for whatever the boy threw at him. Though he kept looking down at his book, showing no concern as he made a humming noise to show he'd heard what the boy said. Naruto made a cross-shaped hand sign quickly and easily, making 50 clones, which confused Kakashi because he knew Naruto hadn't gotten that from another kid. His confusion didn't last long though, as all the Naruto clones that were surrounding him started making hand signs. Hand signs he recognized as he finally looked up from his book. Kakashi tried to jump out of the way as a few clones attempted to grab and hold him in place. The Jounin swatted the clones away easily and jumped out of the way as the other clones did the last seal of the great fireball jutsu, Kyuubi no jutsu. The clones shouted out the jutsu's name as they fired at him. Except for one who was just finishing a different set of hand seals, a set he didn't recognize, which was more than a little unsettling since he had copied over 1,000 jutsu. Of course he didn't have his Sharingan out, so it was just his own memory he was working with, but still. Rinkyuden, drilling air bullet. The Naruto Kakashi assumed was the original called out the name of the previously unknown jutsu. Kakashi filed the name away for later and jumped away from the attack that he realized mid-jump wasn't aimed for him, but his precious book. The air bullet went straight through the clone's fireballs, catching on fire itself and headed right at the book the Jounin held in his hand. Kakashi's eye widened, but even with the surprise direction, the Jounin managed to switch his book to under his arm and quickly made seals for a water jutsu, releasing it midair at the flaming air bullet. Despite his advanced maneuver though, the now not flaming and weaker air bullet pushed through his water attack and hit him in the chest. The Jounin grunted but landed on his feet, only to see Naruto and all the clones were gone from the clearing. The silver-haired Jounin looked around with an arrow die holding his book protectively for about a minute before he grunted, mumbling about stupid Chunin thinking they could burn his precious book. Even if he did taunt them with it. Sasuke watched the whole fight from his hiding place in the trees and watched Kakashi until he was sure the Jounin wasn't following Naruto, and then left the clearing quietly, following the path the blonde had gone. After that display, he knew he'd need Naruto's help to get the bells. Away from the clearing, Naruto laughed as he jumped tree to tree deeper into the forest, and wondered how long it would take his sensei to realize the book he had wasn't the same. Once he believed he was far enough away, the blonde boy stopped to catch his breath. That's when it happened. He felt his heart beat, but not like normal. It was like his heart pulsed once and hard, knocking the breath out of him. Not a moment later he felt really hot, but from the inside like he had a fever, but he didn't get fevers. He didn't even get sick. Her breath caught as she spotted a mop of blonde and realized that Naruto had fallen asleep waiting for her. She looked up and the sun hadn't quite set though, so she wasn't late. Smiling softly, she quietly went and sat beside him. He must have been as tired as she was. Only problem was, should she wake him up? He looked so peaceful. It wasn't as if they could stay sleeping out here though. The sun would be going soon and it would quickly become cold. Resigned, she reached for his shoulder, gently shaking him. When he barely twitched, she pursed her lips. He was so cute. Naruto. She tried shaking him gently again. You gotta get up now, Naruto. She spoke a little louder, hoping it would catch his attention. He only turned into her, slightly moving his arm around her, though as she was sitting he was curling his arm around her bottom. She blushed crimson a second. The only reason she didn't faint was because he wasn't awake and no one was around to see. Taking a deep breath, she tried to scoot away. Naruto frowned and she was afraid he would wake up before she could move away. Before she could do anything though, she found her face on his black shirt. perfectly positioned so her face wasn't on the zipper of his open jacket and his arm around her back with his hand on her waist. She stilled completely wondering if he was awake. "Naruto," she called out meekly. After a few minutes with no answer she slowly picked her head up enough to look at his face. He was still completely asleep. Hinata slumped her head back down, split between wanting him to have done it on purpose and being really glad he wasn't aware. Mentally sighing, she knew there was no easy way out now, so she decided to make the best of it and cuddle into her crush's side. Naruto smirked as he felt his hand curl into him. He was still half asleep when he grabbed her, momentarily forgetting this wasn't the Hinata that would sleep by him every night. Then his best option seemed to be playing dead, for lack of a better term. Besides, he was still recovering and having her with him was comfortable, so he wasn't about to let a good thing go to waste. Once she curled into him he knew he'd won. It was dark when his eyes opened again and he knew this time he would have to get up or Hinata's father would soon send out the troops. Yawning, he carefully sat up, bringing his still sleeping princess with him. He rubbed his eyes before shrugging the shoulder she was sleeping on to wake her. Hinata seemed to frown before snuggling into him further. The blonde time traveler smiled before a small chuckle escaped him. She was adorable in her sleep. "Wake up, my Hi," Naruto said, gently cupping her face. As her eyelids started to move he kissed her forehead. "Hello, beautiful." Naruto smiled as she froze, realizing she really was in his arms. "I'm sorry, you were sleeping, and I tried to wake you, but you..." She started to stutter but she didn't pull away. Naruto decided it was time to stop her though and kissed her cheek. Other than a small leap, she shut up right away. "It's fine, Haim, you have nothing to apologize for. It was my fault anyway." He wasn't going to go into why it was his fault, but he wasn't going to lie about it either. "When do you need to be home?" Naruto decided to quickly change the subject, though he was very pleased she had pulled away in her embarrassment. Her head shot up at the statement though noticing it was pretty dark. Oh, probably about now." Hinata spoke quietly though he could tell she was worried she was late. "Sorry, Haim." He squeezed her in a one-armed hug that he still hadn't taken from around her, and didn't intend to until she moved away from him. "Our first date and all I do is sleep and make you late." He sighed and reluctantly got up, pulling her with him and putting his arm right back around her. "Can I at least walk you home?" He put on his best puppy eyes, and she melted, nodding her consent, just as he knew she would. For Naruto it was too soon before they got to the Hyuga compound. He very reluctantly let go of the girl he already thought of as his and took a step back. "Will I see you tomorrow? Promise not to fall asleep on you again?" Naruto asked, his nerves coming through as he remembered he had no real claim to his princess in this world yet. And she may actually be mad at such a boring first date. "It's quiet, alright, will see you tomorrow." Hinata spoke softly with a small smile, blushing, and not quite able to look at him. Naruto beamed, he hadn't messed up too bad it seemed. "Great. I'll make this up to you, Haim." Naruto smiled at her before making himself turn away. "See you then." He waved back, not being able to help getting a last look. As he walked home he thought of what he could do to make it up to her, what could be the best second date.